There are men who walk into rooms and own them without saying a word. And there are men who walk into rooms and get told, without anyone opening their mouth, that they don't belong. Ethan Cole was the second kind. He knew it the moment he pulled into the glass and steel parking lot of Hale Technologies, his car coughing like it had a personal grudge against him, and watched a woman in a tailored blazer stop mid-sentence to stare. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The look said everything. What no one in that parking lot understood, what she couldn't have known, was that the man she just dismissed was the only reason her company wouldn't collapse before the week was out. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now, Chet, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The engine didn't so much die as give up. That was how Ethan Cole thought of it. Not a breakdown, just a surrender. The old Civic shuddered twice, let out a sound like a dog sneezing in its sleep, and then went still in the middle of the turn into the Hale Technologies visitor parking lot. He sat there for 3 full seconds, both hands on the wheel, staring at the dashboard like he could intimidate it into starting again. "Come on," he said. Not a plea, more like a warning. He turned the key. The engine caught, rattled, and held. He pulled into the nearest open spot and killed it before it could embarrass him again. Through the windshield, the building rose in front of him. 40 stories of glass and brushed steel, every surface catching the morning light and throwing it back like the building was daring you to look directly at it. A row of cars sat in the executive parking spaces nearest the entrance. 2 black Mercedes sedans, a Porsche Cayenne, something low and red that Ethan couldn't name but suspected cost more than his daughter's entire college fund would. The asphalt beneath them was immaculate, the kind of clean that meant someone swept it. His Civic, by contrast, had a long scrape along the passenger door from a grocery store cart that had escaped its corral on a windy Tuesday in March. It was gray, or had been gray once. Now it was a color that had no good name. There was a crack in the rear bumper held together with 2 zip ties and a piece of electrical tape, which was, objectively, a perfectly functional repair. But it looked like what it was, the work of someone who couldn't afford better. Ethan grabbed the canvas bag from the back seat, checked that the components were properly wrapped, and got out. He was wearing dark work pants and a gray Henley, sleeves pushed to the elbow. No lanyard, no company polo, no logo. Just a man with a bag and a job to do. He'd shaved that morning, but in the reflection of the car window he looked like maybe he hadn't, the shadows under his eyes doing most of the talking. He hadn't slept great. Lily had woken up at 2 in the morning, convinced there was something under her bed, and he'd spent 40 minutes sitting on her floor with his back against the mattress, one hand reaching up to hold hers, half asleep, talking her through it. She'd finally gone back to sleep around 3. He hadn't. That was fine. That was most mornings. He slung the bag over one shoulder and started toward the entrance. He was maybe 30 feet from the front doors when he heard the laughter. Not loud, not cruel in the obvious way. It was the laughter of people who were comfortable, who were used to being in spaces where everything was curated and controlled, and who had just encountered something that didn't fit. It was the laughter that came from the sudden awareness that you could laugh, because there was no social cost to it. He turned his head slightly without slowing. There was a group of them near the side of the building. A woman at the center, 4 or 5 others arranged around her the way people arrange themselves around someone whose approval they need. The woman at the center was looking at his car. She was maybe 30, he'd guess. Dark blazer, silk blouse underneath, hair pulled back from her face in a way that suggested it had taken real effort to look like no effort had been made. She was holding a coffee cup in one hand and a phone in the other, and she'd paused mid-conversation to look at the Civic, and then she'd said something that made the people around her laugh again. He caught the tail end of it. "Belongs in a salvage yard, not my parking lot." One of the men beside her, young, in a tight sport coat, the kind of guy who'd peaked at 24 and hadn't fully registered it yet, said, "Should we call someone to tow it?" "It'll probably tow itself," she said, "in pieces." More laughter, easy laughter, the kind that costs nothing to produce and nothing to hear. Ethan kept walking. He didn't slow down, didn't look over again, didn't change his expression. He'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do in a moment like that was let them see you flinch. Not because of pride. Pride was a luxury. but because flinching gave them more. And they already had enough. He pushed through the glass doors and walked up to the reception desk. Well, the lobby of Hale Technologies was the kind of space designed to make you feel small, not in a malicious way, in an architectural way. The ceiling was 3 stories up, all glass and exposed steel, the light falling in from above in clean white columns. The reception desk was a sweep of white stone, backlit, with the company logo rendered in brushed metal above it. Everything said, "We have resources you don't have." The receptionist looked up as he approached. She was young, professionally pleasant, and her eyes did a quick inventory of him. The work clothes, the canvas bag, the slight shadows under his eyes, and filed him under a category. "Delivery entrance is around the back," she said, before he'd opened his mouth. "I'm not delivery," Ethan said. He set his bag on the counter and unzipped it slightly, showing the labeled components inside. "Freelance repair work. Contract through Morrow Technical Solutions. I've got an appointment with your facilities coordinator, Marcus Webb." She looked at the screen, looked at him, looked at the screen again. "I'll need to verify that," she said. "Take your time." She picked up the phone. He waited. Across the lobby, a woman in a headset walked past with a tablet in hand, then a man in a suit carrying a portfolio, then 2 engineers in casual clothes arguing about something quietly. The building hummed with controlled purpose. Everyone here had a place and knew what it was. The receptionist put the phone down. "Mr. Webb will be down shortly. You can wait over there." She gestured toward a seating area, 2 leather chairs and a low glass table, positioned near the wall in a way that made it clear they were for people who needed to wait rather than people who were expected. Ethan sat. He set the bag between his feet and folded his hands in his lap. He'd been in buildings like this before. Not in a long time, but he remembered how they worked. The way status traveled through them, like electricity through wire. The way people read each other, quickly, constantly, without pause, and sorted themselves into a hierarchy so automatic they didn't even know they were doing it. He'd been on the inside of that system once. He knew how it looked from here, from the outside. Honestly, it looked about the same, just in a different direction. He heard her before he saw her. Not loud, she wasn't loud, but there was a quality to her voice, a precision to the way she formed words that made it carry. She was coming from the elevator bank, still talking to someone over her shoulder, and she was moving the way people moved when they had too many things to handle and had decided to handle them all simultaneously. "Push the 11 o'clock. I need the network diagnostic before I talk to Langford, and tell Dev to have the redundancy report on my desk by noon, or he can explain to me personally why it's not there." She came around the corner and stopped short when she saw him. Not dramatically, just a half-beat pause. The kind of pause that happens when you expect one thing and find another. Her eyes went from him to the canvas bag to the seating area and back to him, and then something shifted in her expression. Not softening, more like recalibration. Ethan stood. Not because he felt he had to, but because he'd been raised to stand when someone walked into the room, and that reflex hadn't died regardless of how many times it hadn't been reciprocated. She was the woman from the parking lot. She recognized him at the same moment he recognized her. He could see it, the slight adjustment in her posture, the brief glance at the door behind him, as if she was connecting the man to the car she'd just mocked. There was a half-second where he thought she might say something, acknowledge it. He watched her make the calculation. She didn't. "You're the contractor," she said. "Ethan Cole. I'm here to see Marcus Webb." Marcus got pulled into something. "I'm Vanessa Hale." She said it without preamble, without the warm handshake setup, just the name, dropped like a fact. "You're here about the secondary processing units on the 4th floor. The fan controllers and the thermal regulation module, yeah. Morrow sent the replacement parts." She looked at the bag. "You verified the specifications?" "I verified them before I packed them. Serial numbers matched the work order." Something crossed her face. Not approval, not quite. More like a reassessment of the immediate threat level. She'd met someone she'd expected to require hand-holding and found, at least in this first exchange, that they might not. "Marcus will meet you on 4, she said. "Tamara can take you up." She glanced at the receptionist, who immediately picked up the phone again, and then Vanessa Hale turned and walked away, her phone already out. already moving on to the next thing, leaving Ethan standing in the lobby with his canvas bag and the particular low-grade burn of a morning that had already decided it was going to cost something. He breathed in through his nose. Let it out. Fine. Marcus Webb was a good guy. That was Ethan's read within about 40 seconds. He was in his mid-40s, a little rumpled, the kind of facilities manager who'd come up through the trades rather than through business school, and still remembered which end of a wrench you held. He met Ethan at the elevator with a handshake that meant something. "Sorry about the redirect," Marcus said, already walking. "We had a situation in server room B this morning. Nothing catastrophic, just weird. System's been behaving strangely for the past few days, and nobody's been able to put a finger on why." "Weird how?" "Intermittent. Load spikes that don't track with usage. The redundancy systems kicking in at odd intervals. Diagnostics come back clean, which is the part that makes me nervous." He pushed open a door to the technical corridor, and the ambient noise shifted. The quiet hum of cooling systems, the faint electrical smell that Ethan associated with servers running hard. "Anyway, not your problem. Your problem's in here." The fourth-floor technical space was a long room, not as glamorous as the lobby below, lit by fluorescents and lined with server racks and conduit runs along the walls. Ethan found the units Marcus pointed out and crouched down to examine them, setting his bag on the floor beside him. "You want me to stay?" Marcus asked. "Up to you. I've done this model before. Shouldn't take more than 90 minutes if nothing's complicated." "I'll check back in an hour." Marcus's radio crackled something unintelligible, and he was already leaving. Ethan opened his bag and started laying out his tools. He worked the way he always worked, methodically, quietly, without rushing. One thing at a time, in the right order. He'd been doing hands-on technical work for long enough that he didn't need to think about the sequence consciously anymore. His hands knew where to go while his mind could be somewhere else. It went to Lily, as it usually did. She'd be at school now. Mrs. Patterson's third-grade class, second seat from the window, which Lily had negotiated for on the first day by arriving early and sitting there with the specific calm confidence of someone who has decided they are going to win a minor territorial dispute. She told him about it that afternoon like it was a military campaign. "I just sat there, Daddy, and I didn't move." And eventually she just sat somewhere else. 8 years old and already knew how to hold her ground without making a scene. He didn't know where she'd gotten that. Probably not from him. He'd spent most of his adult life making scenes quietly, which was its own kind of exhausting. He pulled the first fan controller unit and checked the connectors. They were corroded, worse than the work order had described. Not catastrophic, but enough to cause intermittent failures. He tagged the degree of corrosion in his mental notes and moved on to the next one. He was halfway through the second unit when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not dramatic, just a soft, rhythmic irregularity in the ambient hum of the room, like a heartbeat with a hitch in it. He stopped what he was doing and listened. It was coming from the far end of the room, from the main server rack cluster. The sound of a cooling fan working harder than it should be, cycling up and then easing, cycling up and then easing, in a pattern that wasn't random. He stood and walked toward it. The rack was labeled Core, Routing, Primary. The status lights were green. Everything looked from the outside exactly as it should look, but the sound was wrong. He'd spent enough years listening to machines to know the difference between a machine working and a machine working too hard, and this was the second thing. He crouched down, leaned in, and listened more carefully. The cycling was regular, not random, not erratic. It had a frequency. And underneath it, if he concentrated, there was a second sound. The faint, almost inaudible ticking of a relay engaging and disengaging. He stayed like that for a while, just listening. Then he stood, walked back to his work area, and kept going. It wasn't his job. He was here for the fourth-floor thermal units, not the core routing system. And whatever was happening in that rack might have a perfectly good explanation. Scheduled maintenance tasks running in the background, a load balancing protocol doing exactly what it was designed to do. But it might not. He finished the second thermal unit and started on the third, and the sound stayed in the back of his mind the way sounds did when they were trying to tell you something. He ran into her again at 11:30. He'd finished the repair work and was doing his final system checks, kneeling on the floor with his tablet, when he heard voices in the corridor outside. One of them was Vanessa Hales, that carrying precision again, impossible to miss, and she was not in a good mood. "What do you mean you can't isolate it?" A man's voice, defensive. "The diagnostic suite shows normal across all parameters. If there's a fault, it's not presenting in any standard way." "That's what you said yesterday." "Because yesterday was also. I don't need a record of when you failed to find it, Derek. I need you to find it." The door opened and they came in. Vanessa first, then a man in his 30s in a button-down shirt who wore the expression of someone being walked to the gallows at a pace they personally found unreasonable. Behind him, two more engineers. They stopped when they saw Ethan. "You're still here," Vanessa said. "Final checks. I'll be out of your way in about 20 minutes." She nodded once and turned to the far end of the room, to the core routing rack. "Show me," she told the man named Derek. Ethan watched from the corner of his eye while he ran his checks. Derek walked her through the diagnostic readouts on his tablet, pointing at numbers, explaining protocols. She listened with her arms crossed, and she asked good questions. Better than Ethan would have expected from someone running a company rather than engineering it. She knew enough to know when the answers were incomplete, even if she didn't know why they were incomplete. "The redundancy system keeps stepping in at non-critical load levels," Derek said. "It's technically functioning. The backup systems are doing exactly what they're designed to do, but they're engaging before they should need to, which suggests something is triggering them that shouldn't be." "Or," said one of the other engineers, a woman, younger, who had the look of someone who'd been biting her tongue, "there's a flaw in the threshold parameters. The backup system thinks the primary is failing when it's not." "We've checked the threshold parameters twice," Derek said, not looking at her. "I know, I'm the one who checked them." Ethan stopped checking his tablet. He sat very still for a moment, listening to the sound from the rack. The woman was closer than Derek was. Not exactly right, but closer. The question wasn't why the backup system was engaging. It was what it was engaging in response to. And if the diagnostic suite showed normal, that meant whatever was triggering the backup wasn't something the diagnostic tools were built to look for, which meant it was probably not a software issue. He picked up his tablet again and kept running his checks. Vanessa had moved closer to the rack and was looking at it the way people looked at things when they wanted to understand them by force of will. He could see the tension in her jaw, the way she was running through options and not finding the one she wanted. "When's the investor event?" she said, to no one in particular. "Thursday," Derek said. 3 days. "And if this isn't resolved by Thursday?" "It could be fine," Derek said, and even he didn't sound like he believed it. "If it doesn't escalate." "If," she said. He finished his check, closed his tablet, and started packing up his bag. He did it slowly, taking his time, because he was trying to decide something. He had a thing about minding his own business. He'd learned it through experience, the experience of being somewhere you're not expected to be, and offering an opinion that wasn't asked for and watching the person take your opinion and then find a way to make sure you weren't invited back. He'd learned to complete the job that was on the work order and leave the building. But the sound from the rack was still there, and he knew what it meant. And he knew that in 3 days these people were going to have a very bad day. He finished packing. He stood. He slung the bag over his shoulder. He walked toward the door, and then he stopped. Not a dramatic stop. Not a movie moment. Just him, standing in a technical corridor with the weight of a bag on his shoulder and a decision in front of him that he hadn't asked for. He turned around. "The diagnostic suite isn't going to find it," he said. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone says something from an unexpected direction. Vanessa turned. Derek turned. The two other engineers turned. "Excuse me?" Vanessa said. Her voice was careful in a way that suggested she was deciding, in real time, how to classify what she'd just heard. "The sound it's making," Ethan said. "The fan cycling. It's not random. It's got a frequency. That means something's triggering it on a schedule. If your diagnostic suite isn't catching it, it's because it's not looking for the right thing." There was a silence that had several different layers to it. "The fan cycling is within normal parameters," Derek said. It might be within the numbers your system considers normal, Ethan said, but listen to it for 5 minutes and tell me it sounds normal to you. Derek's jaw tightened. And you're the thermal unit contractor. I'm someone who's been listening to machines for about 12 years. He watched Vanessa. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between skepticism and the kind of reluctant attention you pay to something you didn't expect to be interesting. What do you think it is? She asked. He hesitated, because the honest answer was, I have a theory, not a diagnosis, and I'd need to get into that rack to be sure. And getting into that rack was not anywhere near his work order, and it would take time he hadn't been paid for, and he had to pick Lily up from school at 3. I'd need to look at the physical routing in that rack, he said. Not the software, the actual physical configuration of the backup routing logic. Our engineers have already, Derek started. Looked at the diagnostics, Ethan said. He kept his voice level. He wasn't trying to embarrass the man. He was just trying to be accurate. I'm not talking about the diagnostics. Vanessa looked from him to Derek and then back to him. He could see her doing the math. The cost of letting a thermal contractor poke around in her core routing infrastructure versus the cost of getting to Thursday and finding out Derek's "it could be fine" was wrong. She was a smart woman. He'd known that from the parking lot, actually. You didn't run a company this size without real intelligence underneath all the polish. The question was whether she was smart enough to separate her pride from her judgment. Show me what you're talking about, she said. Derek opened his mouth. Derek? She said it without raising her voice, but it closed the conversation. She looked back at Ethan. Show me. He set his bag down for the second time that morning. He walked to the core routing rack and crouched down, and he showed her the sound first. Made her stand close enough to hear the fan cycle, the specific rhythm of it. She crouched beside him, blazer and all, and she listened. Okay, she said quietly. I hear it. It's about every 40 seconds, which means whatever's triggering it is on a 40-second cycle. That's not a system load issue. Loads don't pulse like that. It's something repeating on a schedule. What kind of something? That's what I need to look at. He glanced at her. Is it okay if I open the rack? She looked at Derek, who was standing behind them with his arms crossed in the specific posture of a man who had decided to protect his dignity by being visibly skeptical. Derek, is there any reason he shouldn't? It's not. He's not authorized for core infrastructure. I'm authorizing him, she said. Can you pull up the physical routing diagrams for this rack? Derek's jaw worked. He picked up his tablet. Ethan opened the rack. The inside was dense. Multiple processing units, cable runs, the backup routing hardware nested in behind the primary systems. He didn't touch anything yet. He just looked. He traced the cable runs with his eyes, following the logic of how the physical connections map to the system functions. The backup routing hardware was at the bottom of the rack. Standard configuration, industrial grade, nothing unusual about the components themselves, but the way they'd been integrated with the primary system, the physical path that a failover signal would travel in the event of a primary failure. There was something about it that made him slow down. He leaned in closer. Can I see the routing diagram? He asked. Derek came forward with the tablet reluctantly. Ethan took it and studied the layout. Then he looked at the physical installation, then back at the diagram. There it was. It wasn't obvious. If you were looking at the software, if you were running diagnostics through the system interface, you would never see it, because it was a physical issue, and it looked intentional if you didn't know what you were looking at. But he'd seen a configuration like this once before, years ago, on an industrial control system in a manufacturing plant outside of Columbus. The plant had been doing a major upgrade, and the installer had cut a corner in the physical integration of the backup routing logic, not through malice, through a misunderstanding of how the thermal response of the backup hardware interacted with the primary system under sustained load. The result had been that the backup system, which was supposed to wait for a clear failure signal, was instead reading a slight electrical artifact in the cable run as a low-grade failure condition and partially engaging. Not fully. Not enough to trigger any alarms or flag any diagnostics, but enough to create an additional load on the primary system, which created additional heat, which made the fans work harder. which was why the fans were cycling. Under normal operating conditions, it was an annoyance, a noise. Under peak load, the kind of load you'd see during a major investor event, with all systems running full, presentations running, external connections multiplied, the partial engagement of the backup system would stop being partial. The primary system would flag the additional load as a failure condition and hand off completely to the backup. And the backup, which was not designed to carry the full primary load for sustained periods, would start failing within minutes. He looked up at Vanessa. The backup routing hardware is misintegrated, he said. The physical cable path creates an electrical artifact that the backup system reads as a primary failure condition. Under normal load, it's minor. It creates that cycling sound. Under peak load, it'll initiate a full failover, and your backup system isn't rated to carry your full operational load for more than about... He looked at the spec label on the hardware. 8 minutes. The room was very quiet. That's impossible, Derek said. We had this installation audited. You had the software configuration audited, Ethan said. I'm looking at the physical installation. The artifact is in the cable path, not in any of the configurable parameters. He pointed. You can check it. Run a sustained high-load simulation and watch what happens to the backup engagement level. Derek didn't move. He was looking at the rack with an expression that was trying very hard not to be afraid. Vanessa was also looking at the rack. She'd stood up from her crouch, and she was very still. And Ethan could see the implications moving through her head in real time. The investor event on Thursday, the full operational load, the 8-minute window. How would you fix it? She said. Reconfigure the physical cable run to eliminate the artifact. It's a hands-on job. You can't do it from the interface, but it's not complicated if you know what you're looking at. Maybe 2 hours. You can do that? He considered the question seriously. Yeah, I've done it before, on a similar system. I'd need to see the full routing diagrams, and I'd want someone from your team to verify my work as I go. He looked at her directly. I want someone else in the rack with me. I don't do that kind of work alone on someone else's infrastructure. Something shifted in her expression. He wasn't sure what to call it. Derek, she said, get me the full physical routing documentation and call Marcus. Tell him we need him up here. She turned back to Ethan. What do you need? Time, he said, and an honest conversation about what this is going to cost because it's outside my original work order. She almost smiled. It was the first unguarded expression he'd seen from her. I think we can figure that out, she said. Attempt. He called his neighbor Carol at 1:15. She was 71, lived 2 doors down, and had been what she called Ethan's emergency infrastructure since Lily was 4 years old. She answered on the second ring. You're not going to make pickup, she said. It wasn't a question. I might. It's 3 o'clock and it's only 1:15. Ethan. I know, I'm sorry, something came up. It always does. But her voice wasn't hard and just the particular warmth of someone who'd learned a long time ago that being needed was its own kind of compliment. I'll get her. She can help me with the garden. She's going to tell you everything that's wrong with your garden. I know, she tells me every time. I think she might be right about the drainage. He laughed. A real one, quiet. Thank you, Carol. I'll text when I know what time. Bring me something back if you pass anywhere decent. Deal? He hung up and went back to the rack, where Marcus had arrived and was looking at the routing diagrams with an expression of deep personal offense, as though the infrastructure had done this specifically to make him look bad. I signed off on this installation, Marcus said. The software configuration was probably fine, Ethan said. This is in the physical integration. Easy to miss if you're not looking for it. I should have been looking for it. Yeah, Ethan said, because he wasn't going to lie to the man. But you didn't know to. They worked through the afternoon, Ethan and Marcus side by side, with Derek watching from a chair in the corner with his tablet and his dignity both slightly worse for the day's events. The work was careful and methodical, tracing the cable run, identifying the precise point where the artifact was being generated, redesigning the physical path to eliminate it. Vanessa came in and out. She didn't hover. She checked in, asked specific questions, got specific answers, and left again. When she came back at 4:30, they were doing the verification run. "How's it looking?" she asked from the doorway. "Better?" Marcus was watching the monitoring screen. "Fan cycling stopped. Backup system engagement is at baseline." "We'll do a load simulation to confirm," Ethan said. 30 minutes. She came fully into the room and stood with her arms crossed, watching. In the fluorescent light of the technical corridor, without the morning sun making everything into a fashion shoot, she looked more like what she probably actually was. Someone who worked very hard and was used to carrying a lot of weight, and sometimes had a bad morning and said something unkind in a parking lot without thinking too carefully about who might hear it. He didn't hold it against her. Not because he was virtuous, but because he was tired, and holding things against people was expensive, and he didn't have the budget for it. The simulation ran. The numbers held. Marcus exhaled from somewhere deep in his chest. "We're good." "Run it for the full load profile," Ethan said. "The investor event profile, maximum concurrent connections, everything. Don't confirm until you've run the worst case." Marcus looked at him, then he looked at the screen. "Yeah, you're right." He started adjusting the simulation parameters. Ethan started packing up his tools. He was almost done when he heard her behind him. "Mr. Cole?" He looked up. Vanessa Hale was standing a few feet away, and she had the look of someone who had prepared something to say and was now finding that the words weren't sitting the way they'd been arranged. "This morning," she said. "Outside. I said something." She stopped, started again. "I made a comment about your car. In front of my staff." He waited. "That was—" She let out a breath through her nose. "That was unprofessional and unkind, and I'd like to apologize for it." He looked at her for a moment. She wasn't making it easy on herself. She was looking straight at him, the way people did when they decided to do something and were going to do it all the way. "It's fine," he said. "It's not, though." She said it simply, without drama. "You didn't deserve that. You came here to do a job and you were treated like you didn't belong. And then you—" She gestured vaguely at the rack, at the room. "You still helped." He thought about saying something polished, something that would close the moment cleanly and let them both move on. But he was tired, and he had a daughter to get home to, and he didn't have the energy for polish. "People make assumptions," he said. "It's not your worst quality." She blinked. It was the last thing she'd expected. "That's—" She almost laughed, and it was more real than anything he'd heard from her all day. "That's a very generous framing." "It wasn't generosity," he said, "just accurate." He picked up his bag. Marcus was still running the simulation, Derek was still sitting in his corner, and the room was humming with the sound of systems running the way they were supposed to run. "I'll send the revised invoice through Morrow," Ethan said. "Marcus has my contact information if anything else comes up." He walked to the door. "Mr. Cole." He paused again. "Thank you," Vanessa said. Not with any performance in it, just the two words, straight. He nodded once and walked out. Ta-da. He picked up Lily at Carol's at 6:45. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of paper covered in pencil marks, explaining to Carol, with the patient authority of someone who has found a fundamental error in another person's thinking, exactly what was wrong with the North Bed drainage situation. She looked up when he came in and said, "Daddy," in the particular tone she used when she was happy to see him, but was in the middle of something. "She found 3 problems," Carol told him. "I found 4, Lily said. "But number 4 is a maybe." He sat down at the table beside her and looked at the paper. She'd drawn a cross-section of the garden bed from memory, with arrows indicating water flow and handwritten labels. He didn't know where she'd learned to diagram things like this. He suspected she'd figured it out herself. "Walk me through it," he said. She did. In the car on the way home, while he drove through the early evening with his window cracked and the smell of cut grass coming in from somewhere, she talked through all 4 problems, 3 definites and the maybe. And he listened and asked questions, and she answered them with the precise confidence of someone who had thought it through and knew they were right. His car shuddered once at a stoplight. The engine caught and held. He drove home. Through the windshield, the city moved past in pieces. Storefronts, bus stops, other cars, a woman walking a large dog who'd decided the leash was optional. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary texture of a life. He had a daughter who diagrammed drainage systems from memory. He had a neighbor who picked her up without complaint. He had a car that started, most of the time, when he needed it to. He had a day that had cost him something and given him something back in an amount he hadn't added up yet. That was most days. That was fine. That was enough. The invoice Ethan sent through Morrow Technical Solutions was fair. He knew it was fair because he'd spent 20 minutes staring at it the night before, second-guessing himself, adding things up twice, and finally landing on a number that reflected the actual hours and the actual expertise without inflating either. He wasn't someone who believed in punishing people for needing him. He also wasn't someone who believed in discounting himself out of some reflex toward smallness. He submitted it and didn't think about it again. Lily had a school presentation that week, something about ecosystems, which she'd approached with the same systematic intensity she brought to Carol's drainage problem. And he spent 2 evenings at the kitchen table cutting out pictures of fish from a nature magazine while she narrated facts at him that he only half understood but listened to completely. She had his full attention in those evenings in a way that most of his adult life did not. It was easy with her. She didn't require him to perform anything. She just wanted him present, and he was. On Wednesday morning, his phone rang while he was making her lunch. He didn't recognize the number, but the area code was local. He answered it with his shoulder while his hand stayed on the cutting board. "Mr. Cole?" A woman's voice, precise, familiar in its precision. "This is Vanessa Hale." He put the knife down. "Ms. Hale, I have a question for you, and I want you to answer it honestly rather than diplomatically." He reached over and turned down the radio, which Lily had turned up at some point. "All right. The simulation we ran Monday. We ran the full investor event load profile, like you said. Everything held. A pause that was not quite comfortable. But last night, one of my engineers, not Derek, flagged something in the monitoring data from the simulation, a secondary anomaly. Smaller than what you found, different location in the system, but similar pattern." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Same type of issue? Physical integration?" "That's what she thinks. She's not certain." "Who's she?" "Her name is Priya Anand. She's been on my infrastructure team for 2 years. She's the one who was arguing with Derek on Monday about threshold parameters." He remembered her. The woman who'd been closer to the right answer than anyone else in the room. "Is she good?" he asked. "She's the best engineer I have, and she's 28 years old, which means half my senior team doesn't take her seriously enough." There was a flatness in how she said it that suggested this was a situation Vanessa found personally offensive. She wants to walk through her findings with someone who can assess them physically, not theoretically. And your senior team can't do that. My senior team can do a great many things. What you did Monday, the way you listened to that rack, the way you traced it physically, that's not something any of them did. He picked up the knife again, turned back to the cutting board. He was thinking. "The investor event's tomorrow," he said. "Yes. Ms. Hale, if there's a second fault in that system and it presents during your event—" "I know," she said. "Why do you think I'm calling you at 8 in the morning?" He finished cutting the sandwich, put it in the container, and stood with one hand on the counter. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Lily at the table, absorbed in her ecosystem notes, her pencil moving in quick, certain strokes. "I can come in this afternoon," he said. "I've got something until noon, and I need to arrange pickup for my daughter, so 2 o'clock, maybe 2:30? "That works." Another pause, shorter this time. "I've instructed our finance office to process your invoice at the full amount, plus a 20% supplement for the scope extension, and I'll have a separate contract drawn up for today's work." He hadn't asked for any of that. He didn't say so. "I'll see you at 2:30, he said. He packed Lily's lunch, drove her to school, listened to her recite 3 more ecosystem facts from memory on the way, kissed the top of her head at the drop-off, and drove back to the apartment to get his tools. The morning was clear and cold, the sky the particular pale blue of early autumn that always made him feel like something was about to change. He wasn't wrong, as it turned out. He just didn't know how much. Priya Anand was waiting for him on the 4th floor when he arrived, and she'd clearly been waiting for a while. There was a half-empty coffee cup on the floor beside her and a tablet in her hands covered in annotated diagrams. She was compact and quick-eyed, the kind of person who listened to you with their whole face. "You're the guy from Monday," she said, before he'd fully stepped off the elevator. Ethan Cole. Priya. She didn't offer her hand because she already had the tablet extended toward him. Look at this. He looked. It was a graph of the monitoring data from the load simulation. He could see the point where the backup system had normalized, the fan cycling flattening out. But further into the simulation, toward the end, there was a small but distinct irregularity in a different part of the data stream. Secondary bus, he said. Secondary distribution bus, yeah. The anomaly only appeared after about 40 minutes of sustained peak load, which is why the initial diagnostic missed it. She pulled the tablet back and scrolled to a different view. If the investor event runs 3 hours, which it's scheduled to, this thing is going to wake up around the 90-minute mark. What happens when it wakes up? She looked at him directly. Best case, the secondary bus trips a breaker, and we lose a portion of the presentation infrastructure. Recoverable, embarrassing, bad optics. She paused. Worst case, the secondary fault cascades back into the core routing logic, which we just repaired. And the failover we fixed Monday doesn't matter anymore because the trigger is coming from a different direction. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the data. How confident are you? 70%, she said without hesitation. I can't get to 90 without getting into the physical hardware, which is what I need you for. He appreciated that. The number, the honesty, the lack of overclaiming. Show me where, he said. They went deeper into the technical floor, past the core routing rack they'd worked on Monday, to a secondary room at the end of the corridor that held the distribution infrastructure. A different set of hardware, older than the core routing equipment, less prominently positioned and therefore, he suspected, less frequently inspected. The secondary distribution bus was mounted at the back of a dense rack. Priya pulled up the physical routing diagram on her tablet and held it where he could see it while he studied the installation. He spent 5 full minutes just looking. Not touching, not moving, looking. You do this thing, Priya said from beside him. The just listening thing. I watched you do it Monday with the core rack. Machines tell you what's wrong if you give them time to. Derek says that's not an engineering methodology. Derek's not wrong. It's not a methodology. He crouched down to look at the cable routing at the base of the rack. It's just paying attention. She crouched beside him. There, she pointed. That junction. See where the cable bend radius is tighter than spec? He saw it. A cable making a turn that was sharper than it should be. Not by a lot, but enough under sustained thermal stress to create resistance. Resistance created heat. Heat changed the electrical characteristics of the cable, which changed the signal the bus was reading. Over time, he said, under peak load, that bend gets warm. The signal degrades. The bus reads it as a fault condition. And trips, Priya said. Yeah. How long has this been here? The installation was 18 months ago. She sat back on her heels. I've been trying to get a full physical audit of the secondary infrastructure done since February. The request keeps getting tabled. He looked at her. Who tables it? Committee, she said, with the flatness of someone who'd had this specific frustration many times. Budget review, priority queue, not critical enough to rush. Nobody could see the fault, so nobody believed the fault was there. A pause. I knew something was off. The numbers were too clean, if that makes sense. Systems don't behave this cleanly unless something is being masked. He understood exactly what she meant. Systems that looked perfect in diagnostics were often the most concerning ones because real systems had small irregularities, real friction, real evidence of age and use. A system that showed none of those things wasn't clean. It was hiding. Can we fix it today? He asked. She pulled up her tablet again, showing a parts inventory. I have the cable in stock. The rerouting is physically simple. It's getting into this rack safely that takes time. I'd need 2 people minimum and about 3 hours. He checked his watch. It's 2:40. Event starts at 10 tomorrow morning. He did the math. All right, he said. Who else is on your team today? Me and 2 others who I actually trust. Derek is not on that list. 3 people in 3 hours. We can be done by 6:30. Priya looked at him with an expression that was some mixture of relief and something more carefully guarded. You don't have to stay. You could walk me through it, and I could... You said you need 2 people minimum. I said that, yeah. Then I'll stay. She held his gaze for a moment. Why? He thought about the honest answer, which was, because I know what it's like to see a problem clearly and have nobody believe you, and because this building full of very expensive people almost walked into a preventable disaster twice in 3 days, and I don't want to be the person who left before it was finished. What he said was, because the job's not done. She seemed to accept that. They were pulling cable at 4 o'clock when Vanessa came in. She was still in the same blazer from that morning, or one that looked identical, he wasn't sure, and she had her phone in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it. She stopped in the doorway and watched them work for a moment before she spoke. How are we doing? On track, Priya said from inside the rack. Her voice was muffled by the hardware around her. Good. Vanessa looked at Ethan, who was holding the routing diagram and tracking the cable path as Priya rerouted it. Can I ask you something? Sure. When you were here Monday, before you said anything about the core routing issue, you packed your bag. You were going to leave. He didn't deny it. Yeah. What made you stop? He considered this for a second. Priya's hand appeared from inside the rack, and he handed her the connector she was reaching for. I knew what the sound meant, he said, and if I left, and you hit Thursday with that fault still live, nobody would have put it together in time. Not because your team isn't capable. He glanced toward the rack, toward Priya. They just weren't looking in the right place. But it wasn't your problem, Vanessa said. You'd done your job. You could have walked out. I know. So why didn't you? He thought about how to say it in a way that wasn't either self-aggrandizing or falsely modest. He wasn't sure he could. My daughter asked me once, he said, what I would do if I saw something broken that I knew how to fix, but it wasn't my job to fix it. He paused. I told her I'd fix it, because I'd know it was broken, and then I'd have to walk around knowing that. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. How old is she? 8. And she asked you that at 8 years old. She was 7, actually. She was asking about a specific bird feeder at her school that had a broken mounting, but the principal generalizes. Something moved through Vanessa's expression. He watched her look at the rack, at the cables, at the room, and something in her posture settled. I owe you something I haven't said yet, she said. About Monday. Not just the car. She stopped. I was dismissive of you before I knew anything about you. I made assumptions and I acted on them and they were wrong. Not just wrong, I was careless. She said it like it cost her something. I'm not usually careless. People have bad mornings, he said. You had a worse one than I did. Your car broke down in my parking lot, and I made a joke about it in front of 6 of my employees, and then you came into my building and saved my company's most important event of the quarter. She looked at him straight. That's not a bad morning. That's me being someone I don't want to be. He didn't have a pat response to that. It was a more honest thing than most people said to him in a month. Okay, he said. That's all? What do you want me to say? You said a thing you shouldn't have. You know you did. You apologized. He looked at the diagram in his hand. The account settled. It's not, though, she said. I'm still bothered by it. That's your issue to carry, not mine. He said it without hardness. I'm not holding it. If you want to carry it, that's your choice. Priya's hand appeared from the rack again, this time without reaching for anything, just resting on the frame. Ethan got the impression she was listening very carefully. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. Then she did a strange thing. She laughed, quietly, to herself. The way people laughed when they'd been given a response they hadn't seen coming and weren't sure whether to be relieved or unsettled. You're a very unusual person, she said. I've been told. Is it tiring? He thought about it genuinely. Less tiring than the alternative. She looked like she wanted to ask more, but her phone chose that moment to buzz with something that pulled her attention. She glanced at the screen, and the CEO expression was back. The forward-moving, everything has a deadline expression that had nothing to do with the conversation they'd just been having. I have to be on a call, she said. Tell Priya she can reach me directly if she needs authorization for anything. And she paused at the door. Mr. Cole? Ethan. Thank you. She left. From inside the rack, Priya said, She apologized to you. Yeah. She doesn't apologize to people. A pause, the sound of careful hands moving cable through a tight space. She's not a bad person. She grew up in a world where you lead with power or you don't lead at all. It takes a minute for her to recalibrate when she's wrong. Another pause. Took her about 6 months to take me seriously. But once she did, she's been solid. She said you're the best engineer she has. Priya's hand appeared from the rack again, this time with the old cable, which she handed to Ethan. He set it aside. She said that? Priya asked. This morning, on the phone. She said it matter of fact, not like a compliment, just like a fact. Priya was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had a slightly different texture. Good. He understood that too. Cook. At 5:40, they ran the first verification pass. The three of them, Ethan, Priya, and a quiet engineer named Ben, who worked with his hands the way Ethan did, deliberately and without performance, stood in front of the monitoring screen and watched the numbers. The secondary bus held steady. The signal through the corrected cable path was clean, real system clean, with the small normal variations of a system under genuine load, not the uncanny smoothness that had been hiding the fault. Run the 90-minute mark simulation, Ethan said. Ben typed. The simulation jumped forward, still steady. Priya exhaled. It was a long, controlled exhale, the kind you did when you'd been holding your breath for 3 days without fully realizing it. Good, she said. That's good. Run the cascade scenario, Ethan said. The one where both faults are present simultaneously. I want to see what the system would have done tomorrow. Ben looked at him. Why? Because I want to know. Priya nodded. Run it. Ben ran it. The simulation output was not comfortable to look at. At the 90-minute mark, the secondary bus tripped. The signal cascaded back into the primary routing system. The failover logic engaged, and then, because the secondary bus was interfering with the failover path, the failover began to fail as well. By the 102nd minute mark of the simulated event, the system was in a state of complete gridlock, not shut down, but locked in a cycle of failing handoffs between the primary and backup systems, neither able to fully take over. In practice, that meant a building running a major investor event with systems frozen mid-cycle and no clean recovery path. Everything would have to be shut down manually and restarted from scratch. In the middle of whatever presentation Vanessa was planning, with every investor they were trying to impress watching it happen in real time, the three of them looked at the screen in silence. 92 minutes, Ben said. Yeah, Priya said. Ethan picked up his tools and started packing them for the second time that week. His back ached in the particular way it did after an afternoon of crouching on concrete floors. He had a bruise forming on his right forearm from where he'd caught himself on a rack edge. His hands were clean. He was always careful about that, always wore gloves when working around active hardware, but his knees were unhappy. He was 32 years old and some mornings felt like twice that, and other mornings felt like nothing at all. He zipped the bag. You should be here tomorrow, Priya said, during the event, on site. He looked at her. Why? Because I'd feel better, she said, with the directness of someone who didn't waste words on false modesty. We fixed both faults. The simulations look clean, but you've got a read on this system that I don't have yet. And if something unexpected comes up during a live 3-hour event, I want someone in this building who can do what you do. He thought about it. I've got to get my daughter to school by 8:15. Event doesn't start until 10. You could be here by 9, 9:30. And if nothing goes wrong, I spend 3 hours watching numbers I could have been watching from home. If nothing goes wrong, I'll buy you lunch. He considered her. She was looking at him with the steady, open expression of someone who was asking a real thing and had thought it through. What do you think the odds are? He asked. Honestly, that something goes wrong that we haven't caught? She thought. 20%. Maybe less. A pause. But this event is worth $140 million in potential investment. 20% of $140 million is $28 million, he said. Yeah. He picked up his bag. I'll be here by 9. She nodded once, the nod of someone crossing an item off a mental list. I'll have coffee. Priya. She looked up. You found this, he said. You've been pushing for a physical audit for months. You're the reason this building doesn't go down tomorrow." He said it simply, without decoration, because she struck him as someone who'd hear the decoration and throw it away and miss the actual point. "Make sure the right people know that." She was quiet for a moment. Her expression didn't change much, but something in it did. "I'll tell Vanessa," she said. "Tomorrow. After." "Tell her tonight," he said, "before anything else changes the story." She looked at him for a moment, and he could see her deciding something. "Okay," she said. He left the building at 6:12, the parking lot mostly empty now, the evening air colder than the afternoon had been. His car started on the first try, which he chose to take as a sign of something. He wasn't sure what, but something. He pulled out onto the street and headed toward Carroll's. The city was doing its early evening thing, the light going amber and long, the traffic finding its rhythm. He had his window cracked an inch and the radio on low, some station playing something with a piano in it that he didn't recognize but didn't change. His phone buzzed on the seat. He didn't check it while driving. At a red light, 3 blocks from Carroll's street, he picked it up. The text was from a number he didn't have saved, but the message identified the sender clearly enough. "This is Vanessa Hale. Priya told me what you said. She also told me about the Cascade simulation. I want you to know that I looked at those numbers and I understand what we were walking into. Thank you doesn't quite cover it, but I don't have better words right now. VH." He read it twice. Then he set the phone down as the light turned green. He didn't reply right away. He drove the last 3 blocks to Carroll's, parked, walked up to the door, and rang the bell. He could hear Lily inside telling Carroll something with great urgency, and Carroll's voice responding with the particular patience of someone who had chosen to engage. The door opened and Lily was there, 8 years old, 1 sock on and 1 sock not, holding a paper with an extremely detailed diagram on it. "Daddy, I figured out the maybe," she said. "The drainage, maybe?" "It's definitely," she said. "Come in, I'll show you." He stepped inside and let the door close behind him, and looked at his daughter and her diagram, and the complete certainty in her face, and something in his chest that had been held tight all day just loosen. Not all the way, but enough. He'd reply to the text later. After dinner, after the drainage definitely, after Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet. For now, he sat down at Carroll's kitchen table and looked at the diagram and listened. He replied to Vanessa's text that night, after Lily was asleep. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, looking at the phone, trying to figure out what to say that wasn't either too much or too little. He was aware that the dynamic between them had shifted, not dramatically, but in the way dynamics shifted when people saw each other do something real. They'd each shown the other something unplanned. That changed the geometry of a relationship, even one that was technically professional and practically new. He typed, "The job needed doing. See you at 9. He looked at it. It was terse to the point of being almost rude, but it was honest, and honest was usually better than polished when you weren't sure where the line was. He sent it and went to bed. He dropped Lily at school at 8:10, which gave her 5 minutes to spare. She was very precise about not being early in a way that looked like trying, while also never being late. He'd watched her develop this social calibration over the past year and found it equal parts amusing and mildly terrifying. She was 8. He'd been 40 before he figured that out. He pulled into the Hale Technologies parking lot at 9:17. Same spot as Monday, mostly out of habit. The Civic knocked once when he cut the engine, then settled. He sat for a moment before getting out, doing the thing he always did before walking into a situation, running through what he knew, what he didn't know, and what he was going to do if it went sideways. What he knew, 2 infrastructure faults, both corrected, both verified by simulation. Systems running at baseline overnight per the remote monitoring data. Priya had texted him at 7:30. She was already in the building, had been since before 7, he suspected. What he didn't know, whether the corrected systems behaved under live load exactly as they'd behaved in simulation. Simulations were approximations. Reality had variables that simulations didn't know to account for. What he'd do if it went sideways, that depended on how and where. He got out and went inside. The lobby was different that morning, more people, higher energy, a specific kind of controlled tension in the air that came from an event day. Staff in better clothes than usual, a small production crew setting up additional AV equipment near the conference wing, a cluster of people he didn't recognize standing near the elevator bank, talking in the quiet, careful way of people who were important and knew it. The investors were already arriving. Priya was waiting for him by the reception desk with a coffee, as promised. She looked like she'd slept about as well as he had, which was to say adequately, but not well. "Anything overnight?" he asked, taking the coffee. "Nothing. Steady as a heartbeat." She handed him a visitor badge, a proper one this time, with his name on it, not the generic contractor tag from Monday. "I got you access to the technical floor and the secondary infrastructure room. If something happens, you don't need to wait for me." "How long is the event?" 3 hours, with a 30-minute setup buffer. They go live at 10:30. Full investor group is 22 people, plus Vanessa's executive team. The presentation runs on the primary infrastructure. If primary has any issues, the failover is supposed to bring backup online seamlessly. Supposed to. Yeah. She looked at him sideways. "We fixed the thing that would have broken the supposed to, so we should be fine." "But you want me here anyway." "I want you here anyway." They went up together. The event floor was 2 above the technical floor, and as the elevator rose, Ethan could feel the building working, the slight vibration of additional systems coming online, the HVAC running harder to compensate for more people, the kind of systemic effort that a building made when it was asked to perform at capacity. He'd always felt that in buildings. Other people didn't seem to notice it. He wasn't sure if that was a skill or just a strange thing about how his brain was wired. The technical monitoring station they'd set up was in the corridor between the primary server room and the secondary infrastructure space. A workstation with 3 screens showing real-time system data, the kinds of graphs and numbers that would look like nothing to most people but read clearly to him. He pulled a chair up and sat. Priya sat beside him. "Event goes live in 70 minutes, she said. "We watch, we wait. We don't touch anything unless something moves." "Unless something moves," he agreed. It was 9:22. At 9:50, Vanessa came through the corridor. She was in motion. That was her default state, he was learning. But she paused when she saw the monitoring station and the 2 of them sitting at it. She had someone with her, a man in his 50s in an expensive suit, silver at his temples, the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades in rooms where money was discussed without discomfort. He was talking when she stopped, and he stopped talking and looked at the monitoring station with the polite but genuine curiosity of someone who didn't fully understand what he was looking at. "Richard," Vanessa said, "this is Ethan Cole. He's the systems consultant who's been working with our infrastructure team this week." She looked at Ethan. "Richard Langford. He's leading the investor group today." Langford extended his hand. Ethan shook it. "Infrastructure," Langford said, with the tone of a man who was interested in the human dimension of things as much as the technical. "What does that mean in practice?" "It means when the building's nervous system isn't working right, he finds out why," Priya said from beside Ethan. Langford looked at her, then back at Ethan. "Are we nervous today?" "No," Ethan said. "We had 2 issues we identified and corrected. We're monitoring to confirm everything holds under live load." "2 issues you identified." Langford glanced at Vanessa. "I didn't know about this." "You didn't need to know about it," she said, with the particular calm of someone who has decided in advance what information is relevant to which person. "They were corrected before today. That's why they're here. To confirm the corrections hold." Langford looked at Ethan again. There was something appraising in his look, the way experienced people looked at other people when they were deciding what category to put them in. "How confident are you?" 90%. Langford tilted his head. "Not 100. Nobody who works with real systems tells you 100. If they do, they're either lying to you or they don't know what they're talking about." Ethan said it straightforwardly, without apology. 90 means we've done the work, we've verified it twice, and we have someone watching it in real time. That's as good as it gets. Langford was quiet for a beat. Then he looked at Vanessa and said, "I like him." She had the expression of someone who found this both slightly amusing and completely expected. "You can tell him that yourself." "I just did." Langford nodded at Ethan. "Good luck." And he walked on, and Vanessa walked with him, and the corridor was quiet again, except for the hum of the systems and the 3 monitoring screens and the sound of the building working. Priya looked at Ethan. 90%. It's 90%. You could have said 95. It's not 95. He looked at the screens, and Louis, it's 90. The other 10% is everything we didn't simulate. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. I just wanted to see if you'd round up for a room. He didn't answer because the primary system load was beginning its pre-event climb on the left monitor, and he was watching it. The event went live at 10:34, 4 minutes behind schedule. From the monitoring station, Ethan watched the load increase. Not in real time exactly, but in the clean, slightly abstracted way of numbers on a screen. Primary system utilization climbed through 50%, 60%, settled in the mid-70s as the presentation infrastructure fully engaged. The backup system sat at its new baseline, steady, the corrected cable path carrying signal cleanly. The secondary distribution bus held. The core routing system held. The fan cycling that had started all of this, that sound he'd heard on Monday morning while his knees were already aching, was gone, replaced by the flat, undramatic hum of systems doing exactly what they were built to do. At 11:10, Priya got up to get more coffee. At 11:20, Ben texted from somewhere else in the building. Looks clean on my end. Ethan replied, same here. At 11:47, primary system utilization peaked at 83% and held there, which meant the presentation had reached its most intensive phase, full data visualization, external connections, multiple simultaneous feeds. The number that would have been the cascade point in Wednesday's simulation, the one they'd watched with the specific uncomfortable silence of people looking at a thing that almost happened. The system absorbed it without a tremor. Ethan looked at the screens and breathed out slowly. Priya came back with the coffee and looked at the screens and did not say anything, which was how he knew she was also relieved. They sat. The minutes passed. At 12:20, the load began its gradual descent, presentation winding down, external connections starting to close, the systems beginning their release from peak. By 12:40, utilization was back in the 40s. The backup system still at baseline. The secondary bus signal still clean. At 1:03, it was over. Priya leaned back in her chair and put her coffee cup on the workstation and stared at the ceiling for a moment. That's it, she said. That's it, Ethan said. 3 hours and 3 minutes. Yep. Nothing. Nothing, he said. And then, because it needed to be said clearly, which is exactly what nothing should feel like. We did the work. The work held. She looked at him sideways. You're not going to let me be dramatic about it. You can be as dramatic as you want. I'm just telling you what it means. She was quiet. Then, it means we didn't fail. It means you didn't fail, he said. You found it. You pushed for it. You had the numbers when it mattered. She picked up her coffee and looked at the screens again. I'm going to tell Vanessa I want the physical audit done. All secondary infrastructure. No more tabling it. Tell her today. I'm going to tell her today. While you're at it, tell her you want to lead it. Priya turned to look at him fully. She'd never Ask her, he said. She might surprise you, or she might not, but at least you've said it. He stood, stretching his back, which made a sound it shouldn't have. You know this system better than anyone in this building. That should mean something. She watched him stretch and looked like she was filing something away. They were walking back toward the elevator when the call came through on Priya's radio. The hardline channel they'd kept open to the event floor, standard protocol. The voice on the other end was Ben, and his voice had a quality to it that made both of them stop walking immediately. Priya, we've got something. She had the radio to her mouth before he'd finished the sentence. What is it? Not the primary, not the secondary bus. A pause that lasted about 1 second too long. It's the auxiliary power routing, generator transfer panel. Something's happening with the transfer switch. Ethan was already moving back toward the monitoring station. He didn't run. Running in a technical crisis was how you made mistakes. But he moved fast, with purpose. He pulled up the auxiliary power system display on the secondary monitor. It wasn't something he'd been watching closely. They'd focused on the primary and secondary infrastructure, and the auxiliary power system was a building system separate from the presentation infrastructure managed by a different team. He scanned the data. The transfer switch was fluctuating, not dramatically, but the numbers were moving in a pattern he recognized from somewhere in the back of his mind, a place where 12 years of hands-on work lived in forms that weren't quite memory and weren't quite instinct, but were something in between. "How old is this transfer switch?" he said, to no one in particular. Priya was already on her tablet. "Generator system was last serviced," she scrolled. 14 months ago. "Was it under load during that service?" "I don't know. I'd have to pull the service records." "Pull them." He was looking at the fluctuation pattern. The transfer switch was the device that shifted the building's power supply from the main grid to the backup generator in the event of a grid failure. Under normal circumstances, it sat idle, but under heavy electrical load, the kind of load a 3-hour high-capacity event put on a building's systems, the transfer switch could experience thermal stress, particularly if it was older and hadn't been fully exercised under load in recent service cycles. The numbers moved again. A small spike, then down, then a longer plateau at an elevated level. "It's thermal," he said. "The switch is running hot." Priya looked at the screen. "That's a building system. That's not our..." "If that switch trips, the building shifts to generator power. And when it shifts, there's a 3 to 5 second gap in power delivery depending on how fast the generator picks up load." He looked at her. 3 to 5 seconds on the primary presentation system in the middle of a live investor event. The UPS should bridge that gap." "Should," he said. She looked at him. "Where's the transfer switch physically?" "Basement, building electrical room." He was already moving toward the door. "Call facilities. Tell them I'm going down there." "You're not authorized for..." "Then get me authorized in the next 2 minutes, or tell me who I'm meeting in the basement." He said it without heat, just the flat urgency of someone who'd done the math. "We've got maybe 15-20 minutes before that switch reaches the temperature where it starts making decisions on its own." She was already on the radio. He took the elevator down because the stairs to the basement were on the far side of the building, and time was the variable he had the least of. The elevator was slow in the specific way elevators were slow when you needed them not to be, and he stood in it watching the floor numbers and running through what he was going to find in the electrical room and what he was going to do when he found it. Transfer switches failed in one of 2 ways. They transferred when they shouldn't, which was a nuisance, or they failed to transfer when they should, which could mean no power at all until someone reset it manually. The pattern on the monitor looked like the first type, which meant the event upstairs was about to get an unscheduled interruption. The basement was cool and smelled of concrete and old electrical infrastructure, the honest smell of a building's guts, nothing like the curated lobby 3 floors above. A facilities technician was already there, a man named Santos, whose badge identified him as Lead Electrical, and he had the access panel for the transfer switch open when Ethan arrived. "You're the consultant?" Santos said without turning around. "Ethan Cole, what are you seeing?" "Switch is running at 108 degrees. Rated operating maximum is 95. Santos pointed at the panel. "We're in the thermal protection zone. If it hits 112, it's going to trip automatically and transfer the building to generator." "How long did generator pick up?" "This unit? About 4 seconds. Maybe 5. "Is the UPS for the event floor rated to bridge 5 seconds at full load?" Santos looked at him. "Theoretically. But this UPS is 3 years old and I don't know when it was last load tested." Ethan looked at the switch panel. The thermal readout was at 109 now. "Can you manually initiate a controlled transfer to generator now, before it trips automatically?" Santos frowned. "I could, but a manual transfer is still going to create a momentary gap. A controlled manual transfer is a smaller gap than an automatic trip, and we control the timing." He looked at Santos directly. "If we wait for the automatic trip, it happens when it happens. If we do it now, we pick the moment. Is there a moment in the next 3 minutes that's better than any other?" Santos thought for exactly 2 seconds. The load peaks tend to dip slightly between presentation segments. "If they're at a segment break right now," Ethan pulled out his phone and called Priya. She picked up in one ring. "What's happening?" We need to know if they're at a segment break in the presentation, a natural pause, anything where the system load dips. Hold on. The sound of movement, a door, then her voice, lower. Yes, they're transitioning between the financial projections and the Q&A segment. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Can you watch the primary utilization on the monitor and tell me when it dips? Yes, it's at 71 right now, dipping towards 68. He looked at Santos. We've got a window. Can you do a controlled manual transfer? I can do it. But if the UPS doesn't bridge the gap, I know. He held Santos's gaze. Your call. You know this equipment better than I do. Santos looked at the thermal readout. 109 still, holding. And then at the switch panel, and then at Ethan. He was a man who'd been working with this building's infrastructure long enough to know its character, the way Ethan had learned to know machines, and he was reading it now. If that switch auto trips, Santos said, we don't control anything, we just watch it happen. Yeah. Call your person, Santos said. Tell her to watch for 65 on primary utilization. That's our window. Ethan put the phone back to his ear. Watch for 65. Watching, Priya said. The thermal readout moved. 109.4. Santos had his hand on the manual transfer control, a large lever with a safety cover, the kind of switch that existed in buildings because human judgment was sometimes the last line of defense between a controlled situation and an uncontrolled one. 68, Priya said, still dropping. The readout hit 110. 66. 110.2. 65.8. 65.3. 65. Now, Ethan said. Santos pulled the lever. The basement lights flickered. Not dramatically. A single, brief dimming, less than 2 seconds, the kind of thing that in a kitchen would make you look up from what you were cooking and then look back down. The transfer switch clunked into its new position, solid and mechanical, and the generator hum that had been barely perceptible became slightly more perceptible as it accepted the building's load. The light steadied. Ethan's phone was still in his hand. Priya? Still up, she said. Primary utilization blipped to 63 and is recovering. The UPS bridged it. A pause. Event floor didn't notice. They're in Q&A. People are talking. Another pause. Nobody noticed. He exhaled through his nose. Santos was looking at the thermal readout, which was already beginning to come down now that the switch had transferred to its new position and the thermal stress was redistributing. Nice timing, Santos said. You made the call. You gave me the window. Santos closed the access panel and looked at Ethan. I want to know who told you to look at the transfer switch. That's not part of any consultant scope I've seen. Nobody told me. The auxiliary power display was on the secondary monitor. I noticed the numbers moving. Santos looked at him with the particular expression of one tradesperson recognizing something in another. Not admiration exactly, more like acknowledgement. You do this a lot? Santos asked. Come into buildings and fix things that aren't on your work order? Apparently, Ethan said. He was in the lobby at 2:15 about to leave when he heard his name. Vanessa was crossing the lobby with Langford at her side and 3 other people he didn't know, the post-event dispersal that happened when something finished well, and everyone was processing their relief in the form of continued conversation. She said something brief to Langford, who nodded and walked on with the others, and then she came toward Ethan. She looked different than she had this morning, not relaxed exactly, but lighter. The specific lighter of someone who'd been carrying something heavy and had just been allowed to set it down. Priya told me, she said, about the transfer switch. About all of it. About what would have happened if the automatic trip had gone at 90 minutes. About the UPS. She stopped a few feet from him. She told me the event floor didn't notice. They didn't. Because you were in the basement coordinating a manual transfer with a facilities tech you'd met about 90 seconds earlier. Santos is good at his job. Stop doing that, she said. He looked at her. Doing what? Deflecting credit to everyone else. She said it without impatience, more like she'd decided to name a thing she'd been observing. You've done it every time. The core routing. You pointed me at Priya. The secondary bus. It was Priya's numbers, Priya's push. Today it was Santos's call. She crossed her arms. You're right, every time. They did do those things, but so did you. I know, he said simply. I just don't need you to say it. She studied him for a moment. Why not? He thought about it. It was a fair question, and she was asking it seriously. Because the outcome is the thing, he said. Your event ran. Your investors walked out of here without knowing anything went wrong. That's the result. Who gets credit for it doesn't change what it is. She was quiet. Out through the lobby glass, he could see Langford and the others standing near a car, still talking. The afternoon light was coming in at a low angle, and it caught the glass of the building and threw it back in pieces. I want to offer you something, Vanessa said, and I want you to let me finish before you say no. I haven't said no to anything. You're going to want to, she said. I know you're going to want to, so I'm asking you to wait. He waited. I want to bring you on as a systems consultant. Formal contract, not through Morrow. Direct. Your own terms. Scope, hours, rate. You name it, we build the contract around it. She uncrossed her arms. I'm not asking you to come and sit in an office and attend meetings. I've watched you work for 3 days, and that's not what you do, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending it is. I want you available when we need you. On call, essentially. For exactly what you've been doing this week. He looked at her. That's a real offer, she said. Not a polite one. I know, he said. I can tell the difference. And he was thinking, not about the money, though the money would matter, practically, but about the shape of it. How it would fit into a life that had Lily at its center, a life built around being available in the ways that mattered most. I'd need to know what on-call means in practice, he said, because I have a daughter in school, and I'm the only person she's got. So if on-call means my phone rings at 6:30 in the morning and I'm expected to be here by 8, that's a different conversation than if it means I get 72 hours notice and can plan around it. 72 hours minimum, except genuine emergencies. And genuine emergency means the building's burning down, not someone's uncomfortable with a diagnostic result. Genuine emergency means exactly what you'd define it as. You'd have final say on whether a situation qualifies. He looked at her, trying to find the catch. He was experienced enough to look for catches. Why? He said. You have an engineering team. Priya's good, and you know she's good. Why do you need me specifically? Vanessa was quiet for a moment, and he could tell she was choosing to say a real thing rather than a diplomatic thing. Because in 3 days, she said, you found 2 infrastructure faults that my team missed over 18 months, and then you were in a basement coordinating a manual power transfer based on a number you noticed on a secondary monitor that nobody asked you to watch. She looked at him steadily. That's not a skill I can hire for in the normal way. It's not on anyone's resume. It's something you either have or you don't. A pause. And you have it. The lobby was quieter now, most people gone. The production crew still disassembling AV equipment in the conference wing. The light through the glass was orange now, the day moving toward its end. I'll think about it, he said, seriously, not as a way of saying no. I know, she said. I'll have our legal team draft a framework. You don't have to sign anything, just look at it. He nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else, and then didn't, and then did. Your daughter, she said. What's her name? The question caught him slightly off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was genuine. He could hear the difference. Lily? He said. How old? 8. Vanessa nodded slowly, like she was placing this information somewhere careful. She's lucky, she said, to have someone who builds their whole life around her schedule. He thought about Lily at Carol's kitchen table with her drainage diagram, one sock on, completely certain about the maybe. It goes both ways, he said. He picked up his bag and walked out through the glass doors into the afternoon, past the spot where Vanessa had stood on Monday morning, and said something about his car that she wished she hadn't. The car started on the first try. He drove out of the lot and didn't look back at the building because there was no reason to. Everything that mattered about that building he'd carry with him. The sound the rack had made, the angle of Priya's handwriting on her tablet, the particular thud of Santos's hand on the transfer switch lever. He drove toward Lily's school. Traffic was ugly at this hour, the way it always was, and he sat in it without impatience, which was something it had taken him years to manage. He thought about the contract offer. He thought about 72 hours minimum and final say on emergencies and his own terms. He thought about Lily's college fund, which was real and growing slowly, and would need to grow faster. He thought about the shape a life could have if you built it deliberately, from the inside out, with what you actually valued rather than what you were supposed to value. His phone buzzed. He didn't check it. At pickup, Lily came out of the school doors at exactly the right moment, not early, not late, and got into the car and said, "We had a substitute today, and she got 3 things wrong." And he said, "What 3 things?" And she told him, and he listened, and the city moved past them in the window while the evening came on and the day finished itself out. He checked the phone at a red light. It was Priya. "We should do that full physical audit before the end of the month. I'm going to tell Vanessa tomorrow. Thought you should know." He typed back one-handed. "Good. Tell her you want to lead it." A pause. Then, "Already planning on it." He smiled at that. Not a big smile, just the kind that happened when something went the way it was supposed to go. The light changed. He drove on. The contract arrived as a PDF on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the investor event. Ethan was at the kitchen table when it came through, coffee in hand, Lily already at school, the apartment quiet in the particular way it was quiet when she wasn't in it, which was a different kind of quiet than silence, more like an absence with texture. He opened the document on his laptop and read it the way he read anything that mattered. Slowly, from the beginning, without skipping to the number first. The number, when he got to it, was more than he'd expected. Not extravagant, Vanessa hadn't padded it to seem generous, but fair in a way that suggested someone had actually thought about what his time was worth, rather than starting low and waiting to be negotiated up. The terms were what she'd described in the lobby. 72-hour minimum notice, genuine emergency defined by his judgment, scope limited to infrastructure assessment and hands-on systems work, no office requirements, no meetings unless he chose to attend. There was a clause he hadn't anticipated, a provision that any engagement requiring more than 4 consecutive hours would include a full-day rate regardless of actual hours worked, because the document noted, in dry legal language, that the consultant's time has value beyond the hours physically spent on site. He read that clause twice. He called the number at the bottom of the document, not Vanessa's number, a legal contact, and asked 3 questions about liability scope, contract termination terms, and whether the emergency clause had ever been tested in practice. The lawyer on the other end, a woman named Chen who sounded like she'd answered stranger questions, answered all 3 without hesitation. He thanked her and hung up. He sat with the document open on the screen and his coffee going cold and thought about the version of himself that had existed 6 years ago, before Lily, before the series of decisions and compromises and flat-out surrenders that had moved him from a mid-level systems design position at an industrial firm to a freelance contractor who drove a gray Civic and delivered repair components to buildings that didn't know what to do with him. He hadn't chosen that trajectory. It had happened to him the way things happened, gradually, then all at once, the way a structure failed when the stress exceeded its design tolerance. His daughter's mother had left when Lily was 14 months old. Not dramatically, not with a scene, just with a Tuesday morning announcement and a suitcase and the specific exhaustion of someone who had decided they were done. He didn't blame her, not anymore. He'd blamed her for a while, and then he'd understood it, and understanding it was worse in some ways and better in others. After that, his job had required travel. The job and Lily were not compatible. He'd chosen Lily without hesitating, which had meant giving up the job, which had meant starting over, which had meant whatever he could find that kept him close to home and paid enough to keep the lights on, and Lily fed and the college fund growing at whatever rate he could manage. He'd been good at the corporate work. He'd been, if he was honest about it, genuinely good. The kind of good that came from caring about the problem, rather than caring about the impression you made solving it. But good at something didn't mean you got to keep doing it just because you wanted to. Life didn't work that way. You made the choices that were in front of you with the information you had, and you lived inside the results. He looked at the contract. This was something different. This was a door that had opened from a direction he hadn't expected, held by a woman who'd mocked his car 3 days before she offered him a contract, which was its own kind of story. Not a tidy one, but an honest one. He signed it electronically, submitted it, and went to make a fresh cup of coffee. His first official engagement as a contracted consultant for Hale Technologies was not an emergency. It was the physical audit. Priya had gotten her request approved. She'd told him about it over the phone, with the specific understated satisfaction of someone who'd won an argument they'd been having for a long time. She'd also gotten the lead. Ethan found out the second part from Marcus, who mentioned it in passing while they were both reviewing infrastructure schematics in the technical corridor 2 weeks after the investor event. "She come to you about leading it?" Ethan asked. "She came to Vanessa," Marcus said. "Vanessa asked me if I had any objection. I told her I didn't, which is true, and also that it was probably about a year overdue, which is also true." He looked at the schematic. "I've worked with Priya for 2 years. She's been right more often than I've given her credit for. That's on me." It was a straightforward thing to say, and it cost Marcus something to say it, which meant it was worth more than the words. The audit took 11 days across 3 weeks, accommodating Ethan's schedule and the building's operational calendar. He worked alongside Priya and Ben and 2 other engineers whose names he learned by the second day. A quiet man named Terrence, who worked with the methodical patience of someone who'd long since stopped trying to impress anyone, and a younger woman named Jules, who asked a lot of questions and wrote everything down in a physical notebook, which Ethan respected. They found 4 additional issues. None as severe as the core routing fault or the secondary bus, but none trivial either. A junction in the eastern data corridor where thermal expansion of the conduit had been slowly compressing a cable bundle over 2 years. A grounding issue in the backup generator panel, different from the transfer switch problem, deeper in the system, the kind of fault that would have been invisible until it suddenly wasn't. 2 instances of outdated physical connections in the server cooling system that had been flagged in a report 18 months ago and then set aside because they weren't immediately critical. They were all immediately critical now, in the sense that they all had correction timelines attached to them, and those timelines were Priya's to manage. On the last day of the audit, they were doing the final walkthrough of the secondary infrastructure room when Priya stopped in the middle of a sentence and said, "Can I ask you something personal?" He looked at her. "You can ask." "You were in industrial systems design before this. Vanessa told me, I hope that's okay. She mentioned it when she was explaining why she wanted you for the audit. It's not a secret. What happened, if you don't mind?" She said it carefully, the way people asked things they genuinely wanted to know but weren't sure they were entitled to. He thought about how to compress it into something honest and short. "I had a daughter and a job that required travel, and I couldn't do both. So I stopped doing one of them." Priya was quiet for a moment. "The job. The job. And you've been doing freelance work since she was about 18 months old." "Yeah." She looked at the rack in front of them without really looking at it. "Do you miss it, the design work?" He considered this seriously. "Sometimes I miss the problems. The big ones, where you had to think about a system at scale, how all the pieces related to each other." He picked up the routing diagram and marked a note in the margin. "But the freelance work has its own thing. You're in the actual machine, not designing it on paper. Inside it, hands on it, listening to it. There's something to that. You're good at that part." "I know," he said, without false modesty. "I wasn't always. You get good at things by doing them badly for a while and paying attention to where you went wrong." Priya wrote something in her own notebook. She'd picked up the habit from Jules by the 3rd day. "For what it's worth," she said, "what you've done this month has changed things here. Not just the faults we fixed, the way the team works. Derek's been different." He raised an eyebrow. "He apologized to me," she said, "for dismissing what I was saying about the threshold parameters. Told me I'd been right." She said it with a neutrality that was doing a lot of work. "He's never done that before." "How was it?" "Awkward as hell." She paused. "But I believe he meant it." "Good," Ethan said. "That's what an apology that means something looks like." She wrote something else in her notebook. He was at the parking garage elevator. The building had directed him to a different lot during the audit, the kind with an actual structure and reserved spaces, which he found slightly amusing. when he heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Vanessa. She was in a coat, which meant she was leaving for somewhere rather than moving between floors, and she looked like she'd had a day that had been longer than most. Not undone. Vanessa Hale was not someone who came undone in visible ways, he'd gathered that, but worn at the edges. "You're done?" she said. "Final walkthrough today? Priya has everything?" "I know. She sent me the summary report an hour ago." She stopped beside him. The elevator took its time. 4 additional faults. 4 correctable ones, nothing catastrophic. The grounding issue in the generator panel wasn't far from catastrophic. It wasn't close either. You had time. She looked at him sideways. "You do that thing where you make things less alarming than they are." "I make them accurately alarming," he said. "There's a difference." The elevator arrived. They both got in, and for a moment there was the silence of an elevator, which was its own kind of forced intimacy. 2 people in a small space with nowhere to redirect their attention. "Can I ask you something?" Vanessa said. "Priya asked me the same thing today. Did you answer?" "Yeah? Then maybe I'll get an answer too." She was looking at the elevator doors. "The morning you came in, Monday, before you said anything about the routing fault, you were in the lobby waiting, and I walked through and recognized you from the parking lot." "I remember." "I didn't say anything. I just moved on, like it hadn't happened." She paused. "Why did you still help? Not just that day. Why did you come back the next day? And the day after? You had every reason not to." He thought about the honest answer, which was, because the reasons not to were about pride. And pride was a luxury he'd stopped being able to afford when Lily was 14 months old, and he'd had to figure out how to keep both of them alive on a single income and no support structure, and a job he was walking away from. What he said was, "Because it wasn't about you." She turned to look at him. The elevator opened on the parking level. "The problem was real," he said, stepping out. "The problem didn't care what you said in the parking lot, and I knew how to fix it." He turned back to face her briefly. "That's it. That's the whole thing." She was standing in the elevator with one hand on the door to keep it open, and she had the expression of someone who'd expected a more complicated answer and wasn't sure whether the simple one was a relief or a disappointment. "That's a hard way to live," she said. "No," he said. "It's actually the easy part." He walked to his car. He heard the elevator close behind him. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, Vanessa called him. Not texted. Called. He was making dinner, Lily at the table doing homework, the apartment warm with the smell of whatever he was improvising from what was left in the refrigerator. "I need to tell you something," she said when he answered. "And I'm telling you because you were involved and you should know, not because I want anything from you in response." He turned the burner down. "All right. Richard Langford's group committed this morning, the full investment, $142 million. He was quiet for a moment. "Congratulations," he said. They specifically cited operational resilience as a factor in their confidence. "Langford told me personally that it was the smoothest investor event he'd attended in years." A pause. "He said it looked like we had everything completely under control." "You did," Ethan said. "By the time the event started, you did. Because of what you found and fixed and stayed to watch." He didn't argue with her. She was right, and arguing with right things was a waste of time. "I'm glad it worked out," he said. "That's all? What else would you like me to say?" He heard her exhale, something that might have been a laugh or might have been the specific exhalation of a person who'd been holding tension for weeks and was finally allowed to release it. "Nothing," she said. I wanted to tell you, person to person, not through a report or a contract addendum. I appreciate it." A brief silence, comfortable in a way that silences between them hadn't been at the beginning. "How's Lily?" Vanessa asked. He looked across the kitchen to the table where Lily was sitting with her math homework, erasing something with the specific intensity of someone who had written the wrong thing and was personally offended by it. "She's currently at war with a long division problem," he said. Vanessa laughed. A real one, unguarded. "Does she win her wars?" "Almost always, the long division is going to have a bad night." "Good." Another pause. "Ethan, Thank you. For everything this month. The contract covers it. No, she said. It doesn't, not all of it. She said it simply, without drama, the way she'd said things in that lobby on Monday when she'd decided to be direct. Some of what you did this month you did because you're the kind of person who does it. The contract doesn't cover that part. He didn't have a clean answer for that, so he didn't try to manufacture one. Good night, Ms. Hale, he said. Vanessa, she said, I think we're past Ms. Hale. Good night, Vanessa. Good night. He hung up and turned the burner back up and stood at the stove for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. Who was that? Lily asked from the table. A client? What did they want? To say thank you. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to things that interested her. Why do people call to say thank you instead of just texting it? Because some things feel more real when you say them out loud. She thought about this. Like how you always say goodnight instead of writing it on a note. He looked at her. 8 years old, sharp as a tack and twice as pointed. Yeah, he said, like that. She went back to the long division. He went back to dinner, Shah. It was Carol who said it, on a Friday afternoon 2 weeks after that, sitting in her kitchen while Lily was out in the backyard examining the drainage situation for the third time that month. Something's different with you, Carol said. She was making tea and not looking at him, which was how she said things she'd been thinking about for a while. Since that building. He was sitting at her kitchen table with his hands around a mug. Different how? Less like you're carrying something that's about to break. She put the kettle down and looked at him. You've been walking around for years like you were one bad week away from something collapsing. You don't look like that right now. He didn't answer immediately because he wasn't sure she was wrong. I got a contract, he said. Real work, on my terms. It helps. It's not the money, Carol said, sitting down across from him. I've known you through worse money and you didn't look like this. It's something else. He thought about the routing rack and the sound it had made, the way Priya had looked when he told her to ask for the audit lead, the elevator and Vanessa's expression when he'd given her the simple answer. I think, he said slowly, that I'd gotten used to being in rooms where I didn't belong, and then I stopped belonging to the kind of room where you could tell. Carol tilted her head. I stopped being in rooms where people could look at me and see my value clearly, he said, or couldn't see it, either way. I just disappeared into the work, and that was fine. That was what I needed to do. He looked at the mug. But this month, I was in a room where it was visible. What I knew, what I could do. It was just visible, and someone saw it and said so. Someone, Carol said. A few someones, including one someone who called to say thank you on the phone instead of texting. He looked at her. Lily told you. Lily tells me everything. You know this. But Carol wrapped her hands around her own mug. She's not wrong, Ethan. Some things feel more real when you say them out loud. He laughed, short and genuine. I said that to her. And she repeated it to me. Carol smiled. The child is a recording device with drainage opinions. Outside, through the kitchen window, he could see Lily crouched near the garden bed with a stick, testing something in the soil and muttering to herself. Her backpack was still on, because she'd gone straight to the garden when they'd arrived and hadn't thought to take it off. She was completely absorbed, completely certain, completely herself. He watched her for a while. He had a contract with a company that paid him what he was worth and let him set his own hours. He had a daughter who diagrammed drainage systems and won her territorial disputes with quiet patience and said true things without knowing they were true. He had a neighbor who picked her up and made tea and said the things he needed to hear without making him ask for them. He had a car that started most of the time. It wasn't the life he'd planned at 25. It wasn't the life he'd grieved at 28, in those first months alone with a 14-month-old and a refrigerator that needed restocking and a career that was over. It was something else, something built from the materials that had been available rather than the materials he'd expected, which meant it was uneven in places and patched in others and held together in spots by zip ties and electrical tape. But it held. It held because he'd built it to hold, with whatever he had, one decision at a time. That was enough. More than enough some days. Through the window, Lily stood up from the garden, pulled a notebook from her backpack. She'd started carrying one, like Jules, and wrote something down with great conviction. Then she looked up and saw him watching her through the glass, and she held up the notebook so he could see it, though he couldn't read it from here. He gave her a thumbs up anyway. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to writing. Carol, beside him, made a small sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something warmer. "You're going to be all right," she said, not like a prediction, like a thing she'd already confirmed. He picked up his mug. "Yeah," he said, "I know." The offer came on a Wednesday morning in November, 6 weeks after the investor event, on a day when the first real cold of the season had finally settled in and the sky had gone the flat white of a city bracing for winter. Ethan was in the parking garage at Hale Technologies. He'd been called in for a follow-up on the grounding issue in the generator panel, a second-stage correction that Priya had scheduled as part of the audit remediation plan, when Vanessa appeared at the elevator. Not by accident. He could tell by the way she was standing that she'd timed it, had come down specifically to intersect with him before he made it to the technical floor. He slowed and waited. She was in her full CEO configuration, the blazer, the composure, the sense of controlled forward motion, but there was something underneath it that was different than the first week he'd known her, something that had been recalibrated, as Priya had once described it, in a direction that suited her better. She looked like herself, but a version that had made room for something new. "I have a proposal," she said, "a real one, not a contract amendment." He shifted the tool bag on his shoulder. "I'm listening." "Walk with me," she said. "It'll take more than a lobby." They walked, not to the technical floor, but to a conference room on the second floor. A smaller one, not the main event space, the kind used for internal meetings rather than presentations. She closed the door and didn't sit, which told him this was something she'd thought about and was going to say directly without settling in. "I want to offer you a full-time senior position," she said. "Director of Infrastructure Integrity. It's a new role. I created it this week specifically. No one has held it before. It would mean building a function from scratch, setting the scope, determining what physical audit standards look like across all our facilities." He stood on the other side of the table and looked at her. "The pay would be 3 times your current contract rate," she said. "Benefits, equity stake at a junior executive level, a team of your choosing assembled over the first year." She paused. "You would have final authority over any infrastructure decision that touches physical systems, not advisory authority. Final." He absorbed this. "You'd be inside the company," she continued. "Full-time, office presence expected but flexible, travel occasional, never more than 1 trip per quarter, and never more than 3 days at a stretch." "Who decides the trip schedule?" "You do, within the quarter limit." He was quiet, not stalling, thinking. She'd clearly anticipated that he would think rather than react, and she waited without filling the silence. "Why a new role?" he said. "You have a facilities team, you have engineers, Priya's leading the audit program. Why create a director position for something that could be distributed?" "Because distributed isn't working," she said, and there was a particular flatness in how she said it, the flatness of someone who'd arrived at a conclusion through the hard way rather than the easy way. "We had 18 months of undetected faults, 3 separate issues that should have been caught by routine process and weren't. Not because my people aren't capable, they are, but because nobody had the specific mandate to look at the physical reality of this building's systems rather than the software surface of them." She looked at him directly. "You do that naturally. You've done it every time you've been in this building. I need someone whose entire job is to do exactly that, and to build a process that does it systematically so it doesn't depend on a contractor happening to notice a sound while he's packing up his tools." He thought about that Monday morning, the sound the rack had made, the way he'd almost left. "If I'd just walked out," he said, "you'd have gotten to Thursday and lost the event and probably the investment. And then your team would have found the fault afterward during the post-mortem, and you'd have fixed it, and you'd have been more careful going forward." "Yes," she said, "so you didn't need me specifically." "We needed someone like you," she said. "The fact that it was you that week was circumstance, but the gap you filled is real and permanent, and I'm not willing to have it filled by circumstance again." She leaned slightly forward. I'm asking you to fill it deliberately, permanently. He looked at the table between them for a moment. What does Lily's school pickup look like in this version? He said. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, more like recognition. She'd known this was the real question. 3:15 is pickup, right? 3:15, yeah. Core hours are 9 to 3. What happens outside that is your call, as long as the work is getting done. She said it without hesitation, which meant she'd already worked it out. You can work from home on non-meeting days. There'll be non-meeting days. I'll make sure of that. You can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee the building won't develop new faults either. But I can structure the role with that boundary built in as a default, not a favor. She paused. There's a difference between a company that accommodates your daughter's schedule when convenient and a company where that schedule is baked into the job description. I'm offering the second thing. He looked at her. Why? Because I've watched you work for 6 weeks, she said. And I've noticed that the thing that makes you good at this, the patience, the way you listen, the fact that you stayed to finish something even when you'd been treated badly and had every reason to leave, all of that comes from the same place, from having built a life around something that matters more than status or money. She stopped. I'm not going to ask you to unmake that life to come work for me. I'd be getting a different person, and a worse one. He was quiet for a longer moment this time. The honest answer to the question of why he'd come back, why he'd stayed, why he'd gone into the basement with Santos on a protocol that had nothing to do with his work order. The honest answer was that he couldn't watch a thing break when he knew how to fix it. It wasn't nobility, it was just the way he was built. He'd tried, in the years of grinding freelance work, to be more contained about it, more professional in the limited sense of doing only what was on the invoice and leaving the rest alone. He'd never fully managed it. Maybe the problem wasn't him. Maybe the problem was that he'd spent years in contexts too small for what he actually knew how to do. I want to talk to Lily first, he said. Vanessa blinked. It was the last thing she'd expected. She's 8, he said. She's going to have opinions about what her mornings look like, and whether she cares if I'm home when she gets back from school, and what it means if I take a phone call during dinner. These are her terms as much as mine. He looked at Vanessa steadily. She's not a complication to manage around. She's part of the negotiation. Vanessa held his gaze, and something moved through her expression that he didn't have a name for, something that had more layers to it than a business conversation usually required. Okay, she said, talk to Lily. I'll have an answer by Friday. Friday works. He picked up his tool bag from where he'd set it against the wall. He was almost at the door when she said his name. Not Mr. Cole, just Ethan, the way she'd been saying it for a few weeks now, since the lobby after the investor event. He turned. Whatever you decide, she said, I want you to know that the offer stands separately from the contract. If you say no to the full-time position, the consulting arrangement doesn't change. I'm not using one as leverage for the other. He nodded. He'd assumed that, but it was worth her saying it. I know, he said. That's part of why I'm taking it seriously. He asked Lily that evening after dinner while they were doing the dishes. She washed, he dried, a system they'd developed when she was 6 because she'd decided she was old enough to help, and he hadn't argued. I have a question for you, he said. About what? About work. About a change. He handed her the next dish to wash. The company I've been doing work for wants me to come work for them full-time, which would mean I have a set schedule instead of different jobs each week. But it also means some things change. She was quiet, processing. She scrubbed the plate. Like what things? Like I'd have to be at the office some mornings before you leave for school. Carol would take you some days. Carol already takes me sometimes. More often than sometimes, if I do this. She rinsed the plate and handed it to him. Would you be home when I get back? Most days, yeah. That's part of what I'm trying to make sure of. Most days is not all days. No, he said. Most days isn't all days. She thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things she was genuinely uncertain about. He let her think. He didn't try to sell it to her. She was 8 years old, and she had the right to a straight question asked straight. Would it be better for us? She said. The money part? He looked at the side of her face, the small nose, the focused crease between her eyebrows that she'd had since she was an infant. the way she held her mouth when she was thinking hard. Yeah, he said. It would be a lot better. The college fund. Being able to fix the car properly instead of zip ties. He paused. Not having to worry every month about whether the numbers work. She handed him the next dish. You worry about that? Sometimes. She was quiet again. Then, you should have told me. You're 8. I know things, she said, with the particular dignity of someone who has been underestimated before and found it irritating. I could have eaten lunch at school instead of bringing it. The school lunch isn't that bad. He stopped drying the dish he was holding. Something in his chest did a complicated thing. Lily, I'm just saying, if money is a worry, you should tell me. I can help with worries. He put the dish down and turned to look at her fully. She was looking at the sink, still scrubbing, with the studious expression of someone who had said a real thing and was giving him time to receive it without making it into a bigger moment than it needed to be. Which was, he realized, something she'd learned from watching him. He did that. He said real things and then looked away to give the other person room. She was 8 years old and she was already doing the things he did. He put his hand on the top of her head, briefly, the way he did when words weren't the right tool. I'll tell you more, he said. Deal? She considered. Deal. And you should take the job. If it's better for us, you should take it. She handed him the last dish. I like Carol. And you'll still be home most days. Most days, he said. Most days is pretty good, she said. Some dads aren't home any days. He dried the dish and put it in the cabinet, and they finished the kitchen in a comfortable quiet. And he thought about the specific kind of strength it took to be 8 years old and practical about things that were actually hard. And he thought that wherever she'd gotten it from, it wasn't entirely from him. Maybe it was from the version of him she'd been watching all along. The one who showed up and stayed and fixed the thing that needed fixing because he knew how and because he was there. She'd been watching that version her whole life. Maybe she'd just built herself out of what she'd seen. That thought sat with him for a long time after she was asleep. He called Vanessa on Thursday, a day early. Yes, he said when she answered. A pause. Yes? Yes to the director position. I have conditions beyond what we discussed, and I want them in writing before I sign, but the answer is yes. What conditions? The 72-hour travel notice is non-negotiable and goes in the contract, not just the verbal agreement. School events, her performances, her science fairs, anything she's in, are blocked calendar, and I don't move them for meetings. If there's a genuine emergency where I need to be on-site outside of core hours, the company pays for after-school care coordination, not me. He paused. And Priya leads the audit program independently. I'll work alongside her, I'll consult, but she has her own authority. I'm not coming in over her head. Silence on the other end. Then, the first 3 are already in the framework I'm drafting. I'll have legal formalize them. The 4th, a pause. You could have asked for that differently. You could have asked for Priya to report to you. That would have been normal given the seniority gap. I know, he said. I don't want that. She found the secondary fault. She pushed for the audit for 8 months before anyone listened. She should have her own line of authority, not be filtered through mine. She's going to want to know you said that. You can tell her. Another pause, different from the first. You know, Vanessa said, when I walked out of that elevator on Monday morning and I saw you sitting in the lobby, I made a decision about who you were based on your car and your work clothes and the bag you were carrying. And I was wrong in every specific way a person can be wrong about another person. He didn't say anything. I've been thinking about that a lot, she said. What it cost, that assumption. Not to me. I mean to the people I've done it to before without even knowing. The ones I dismissed in lobbies and parking lots without ever finding out what they actually knew. She stopped. I've been running this company for 6 years, and I think I've been operating on a set of assumptions about what competence looks like that were just wrong and expensive and probably cost me more good people than I'll ever be able to count. He let her have the silence she needed. I'm not saying this so you'll tell me it's okay, she said. I know it's not what I'm asking forgiveness for. I'm saying it because it's true, and I think I need to say it to someone who will just let it be true without making it easier than it is. It's true, he said, and you know it. That's the part that matters. Is it enough? He thought about it honestly. It's enough to start from, he said. Whether it's enough all the way depends on what you do next. And the time after that. And the time after that. She was quiet for a moment. That's not a very comforting answer. No, he agreed, but it's the right one. His first day as Director of Infrastructure Integrity at Hale Technologies was a Tuesday in December, cold enough that the car protested slightly before starting, and he sat in the parking lot for a moment after cutting the engine, same spot, out of habit that had become something close to affection, and looked at the building. He thought about that first Monday, the sound of her voice saying something about his car, the way he'd walked through the lobby and sat in the waiting chairs and thought about Lily and her territorial dispute over the window seat, the canvas bag on the floor between his feet, and the 12 years of knowledge it represented that nobody in that building had thought to ask about. He got out and went inside. The receptionist, the same one from Monday, who directed him to the delivery entrance before he'd opened his mouth, smiled when she saw him. She'd learned his name sometime in the past 6 weeks. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." "Morning," he said. "Please call me Ethan." She looked slightly uncertain about this, because the formality of the building had established a grammar she was used to navigating, and Director of Infrastructure Integrity was a title that carried certain expectations. "Okay," she said, after a beat. "Ethan." He went up. Priya was already on the technical floor, as she always was, with Ben and Terrence running the morning checks. She looked up when he came in. "Director," she said, with the particular dryness of someone who found a title amusing without finding the person behind it amusing. "You can skip the title." "I know I can. I'm going to anyway for about a week. Then it'll wear off." She handed him a tablet. "I've been building the annual inspection schedule. I want your eyes on the sequencing before I take it to Vanessa." He looked at the schedule. She'd structured it well, prioritized the highest risk systems, built in reasonable intervals, accounted for operational calendar conflicts. He made 2 notes in the margin, small adjustments to the sequencing around the company's quarterly peak periods. "This is good work," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to know if there's anything wrong with it." 2 things. Minor. He walked her through them. She listened, asked one question, nodded. "I'll adjust before end of day." She took the tablet back. "How's Lily?" "She told me this morning that she's been doing research, and she thinks the classroom drainage argument she had with her teacher last month was mostly right, but she may have overstated one of the supporting points." Priya stared at him. "She's 8. 8.5, he said. "She'd want you to know the half." Priya shook her head slowly, which was what she did when she found something genuinely impressive and wasn't quite ready to say so out loud. Vanessa called him into her office at 11:30, which he'd been expecting, not because she'd told him, but because the shape of the morning had that quality to it, the quiet before conversation. Her office was on the 38th floor, the kind of space that said clearly that the person who worked in it had arrived somewhere. Glass on 2 sides, the city laid out below in the particular way that cities looked from above, smaller than their importance, all the human weight of them compressed into geometry and distance. She was standing at the window when he came in, which was unusual. She was generally in motion or seated. Standing still was a different posture. He sat in one of the chairs across from her desk and waited. She turned from the window. "I had a call this morning with one of our board members. He'd heard about the investor event, not just the outcome, but what happened behind it. Someone talked." "Marcus, probably," Ethan said. "Marcus," she confirmed. "The board member wanted to know about you. Who you were, how you'd gotten involved, what your background was." She moved from the window to her desk but didn't sit. "I told him." And he said, and I'm quoting directly, "If that man was working for you on a freelance contract and you didn't have him on full salary, Vanessa, you've been losing money in ways you can't measure." She looked at Ethan steadily. "He's right. I've known he's right since the second day you were here. I just needed time to structure it correctly." "You structured it correctly," Ethan said. "The contract is fair." "The contract is fair," she agreed. "That's different from it being enough." She sat down. "I want to talk about the infrastructure of the culture here, not the physical systems. The way this organization makes decisions about what and who has value. because that's the thing that allowed 3 faults to sit undetected for 18 months. It wasn't a technical failure. It was a cultural one. She paused. Priya was right for 8 months and nobody heard her. Derek dismissed physical evidence because it didn't appear in the software diagnostic. I walked past a man in my lobby and made a judgment that almost cost my company $140 million. She said it flatly, without softening it. Those 3 things are the same problem. He looked at her. What do you want to do about it? I want you to tell me what you see, she said. Not in the infrastructure, in the building, in the way people work here, what they notice, what they dismiss. You've been here 6 weeks and you've been watching everything. I want to know what you've observed that I haven't. He considered this carefully because it was a real question and deserved a real answer. And real answers about an organization's culture were the kind of thing that could either be useful or damaging depending on how honestly they were received. The problem isn't that your people aren't smart, he said. They are. The problem is that smartness has a hierarchy here that's defined by the wrong things, by credentials and title and the ability to produce a sophisticated-looking report, not by whether you're actually right. He paused. Derek isn't a bad engineer. He looked in the wrong place because nobody had ever rewarded him for looking outside the obvious place. Priya was looking in the right place for 8 months and got tabled, which taught her that being right wasn't enough. She needed to be right in a way that fit the existing process. That's a culture problem. It's teaching the wrong lesson. Vanessa was listening with her whole face, the way she listened when she wasn't performing listening but actually doing it. What would you change, she said. The reward structure for being wrong in interesting ways, he said. Right now, being wrong costs you. Derek's going to spend a year being careful because he was wrong in front of his boss. That means he's going to be less likely to take a risk on a diagnosis that isn't supported by the diagnostic suite, because the diagnostic suite is safe and his own instinct isn't. He looked at her. You want people who trust their instincts? Protect them when their instincts are wrong. Don't just celebrate the times they're right. She was quiet for a long moment. That's going to be a harder change than fixing the cable routing, she said. Yeah, he said. It's also the one that matters more. You can fix a cable in an afternoon. Changing how an organization decides who it believes, that takes years. Are you going to help me with it? That's what you're paying me for, he said, among other things. She looked at him, not the CEO assessment she'd given him that first morning in the lobby, but something more direct and less armored. Can I ask you something that isn't about work? She said. You can ask. Do you ever miss who you were going to be? Before everything changed? She said it carefully. The version of yourself that was on track for something different. He thought about the question honestly, the way it deserved. Sometimes, he said, in the way you miss a road you didn't take. Not because you know it was better, you don't know that, just because you sometimes wonder. He paused. But the life I have isn't a consolation prize for the one I lost. It's a different thing entirely, built from different materials, and some of those materials are better than anything I had before. Like Lily, she said. Like Lily. Like knowing how to listen to a machine when it's telling you something's wrong. Like being in a building I didn't belong in and finding out what I actually knew. He stopped. Losing the corporate path gave me the freelance years, and the freelance years gave me 12 years of hands-on experience that no systems design office would have given me. I'd have been in meetings. I'd have been reading reports. I wouldn't have been on the floor of a server room at 2 p.m. learning what a faulty cable run sounds like from 3 feet away. He looked at her. The wrong road has its own geography. You learn things on it that you can't learn on the right one. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have a version of that, a different version. I came up through companies that rewarded the kind of leadership I described. Lead with certainty, don't show uncertainty, assess people quickly and move on. And I was good at it. I got where I wanted to go. She looked at her hands. And then a contractor with a broken-down car taught me in 1 week that everything I thought I knew about reading people was constructed on a foundation that was wrong, and I had to decide what to do with that. What did you decide? I decided to be uncomfortable about it, she said, not to resolve it too quickly, not to take whatever lesson was most convenient and file it away. She looked up. I've been running this company for 6 years on the assumption that I could read a room accurately, That's a significant assumption to find out was wrong. It wasn't entirely wrong, he said. You read me correctly by the second day. I mocked your car on the first. Yeah, he said. But that's the thing about being wrong in interesting ways. It's more valuable than being right in boring ones, if you do something with it. She looked at him for a moment. How are you not angry about it? She said. About Monday, about the parking lot. He thought about this carefully, because it was the kind of question that deserved an honest answer rather than a virtuous one. Because being angry at it would require me to be surprised by it, he said. And I stopped being surprised by it a long time ago. When you look like I look, when you drive what I drive, when you come into rooms through the contractor entrance, you get treated a particular way. That's just true. Getting angry about it every time it happens is a full-time job I don't have the energy for. He paused. What I care about is whether the person doing it is capable of seeing it when it's pointed out. Most aren't. You were. She held his gaze. That's a very low bar. For most people in most situations, yeah, but you're not most people in most situations. He said it plainly, without flattery. You run a company. How you see determines what you build. A low bar in your position has consequences I don't have. So when you clear it, when you actually look, actually recalibrate, that matters more than the same thing happening between two people in a coffee shop. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the 38th floor windows, the city moved. Traffic, a bird crossing the glass in a fast diagonal, a construction crane turning slowly in the middle distance. The world doing its constant, indifferent work. I'm going to get things wrong again, she said. I know that. I'm going to revert to old patterns in situations where I'm under pressure or tired or not paying attention. I'm not going to be a changed person simply because I've had a changed month. I know, he said. How do I... She stopped. Tried again. How do you stay honest about it? About your own blind spots? How do you keep from just replacing them with new ones? He thought about Lily at the kitchen table, telling him he should have told her about the money worry, that she could have helped with worries. 8 years old and already pointing out the things he was carrying alone that he didn't need to. You keep people around you who will say the true thing, he said, not who tell you what you want to hear. The people who'll say it calmly and expect you to receive it because they believe you're capable of receiving it. He paused. That's what Priya needed from you. And it took a while, but you got there. That's what Lily does for me, and she's been doing it since she could talk. He looked at Vanessa. Surround yourself with people whose honesty you trust and then actually listen to them. That's the whole thing. There isn't a more sophisticated version. She nodded slowly, like she was placing something into a permanent location. He found Priya in the corridor on his way out, going through the revised inspection schedule one more time, pen in hand, the physical notebook open. She talked to you about the culture thing, Priya said, without looking up. She did. She talked to me about it last week. She wants to create a process for surfacing concerns before they become crises. Something more formal than engineer sends request that gets tabled. She turned a page. I told her the process is less important than whether people believe it'll work. If everyone assumes the request will get tabled anyway, the process doesn't matter. What did she say? She said I was right, and she was going to spend the next year proving it. Priya looked up. I told her a year was a reasonable start. He almost smiled. You told Vanessa Hale that a year was a reasonable start. She took it well. Priya capped her pen. She's better than she was. Not fixed. I don't think people fix, not like infrastructure, but recalibrating. She tilted her head. Is that fair? That's fair, he said. Recalibrating is about as much as you can ask. He said goodbye and went down to the garage and got in his car and sat for a moment before starting it, the way he'd been sitting in parking lots for 6 weeks every time he came to this building, because something about the transition between inside and outside required a beat of stillness. Not reflection exactly, just the pause between one thing and the next. He started the car. It started cleanly, first try, as it had done more often lately. He'd had Santos look at it during a spare hour 2 weeks ago, and Santos had fixed something in the fuel system that Ethan hadn't known was degrading, because Santos was the kind of person who noticed things that weren't his immediate problem and addressed them anyway. He drove out of the lot and into the afternoon. The city was doing its November thing. The gray sky, the bare trees, the particular energy of a place that has accepted that warmth is over for a while and has made its peace with it. He drove through it without fighting it, window cracked because he liked the cold air even when it was too cold, radio low, the city moving past him in pieces. He thought about what he'd said to Vanessa, about the wrong road having its own geography. He'd meant it. He meant it completely. But there was a version of meaning it that was about acceptance, settling into the life you'd ended up with, and a version that was about something else, about understanding that the things you'd gathered on the wrong road were actually the materials you needed to build the right life. Not consolation prizes, but the actual tools. He'd spent years in the first version without quite seeing the second. The difference was Lily, mostly. Not because she'd saved him. That was a narrative too clean for what was actually true. But because from the beginning, from those first terrifying months when she was small enough to fit in one of his hands, and he was running on nothing and making decisions he had no training for, she'd been a standard he had to meet. Not a burden, a standard. A reason to be the version of himself that was actually capable, actually present, actually willing to stay in the room until the thing was fixed. He pulled up to the school at 3:10, 5 minutes early, which meant he sat in the line of cars and waited, watching the school doors. Other parents around him on their phones, in their own versions of the same day. A woman in the car ahead with a coffee cup that looked like it had been her only ally since morning. A man 2 cars back who had the look of someone who'd come from somewhere more important and was recalibrating to this moment, the way you had to. At 3:15, the doors opened and the kids came out in the specific rush of children who have been contained for several hours and are now free. He spotted Lily immediately. She always came out toward the front, not because she pushed, but because she was already moving when the doors opened, mind already on whatever came next. Today, she had her backpack on properly and her notebook in her hand, open to a page she was looking at while she walked, which was how he knew she'd thought of something important during the afternoon and written it down. She spotted the car, looked up from the notebook, changed direction toward him. She got in. The car smelled like her cold air and the particular warm paper smell of a school day. "How was it?" he said. "Good. We did fractions." She opened the notebook again. "Daddy, I figured out something about the drainage model. I think the issue Carol's been having is actually upstream of what I identified before. The problem isn't where the water is going, it's where it's starting from." He looked at her. The notebook had a diagram in it, a cross-section of terrain, with arrows indicating water movement. She'd drawn it during school, he guessed, during whatever class had been boring enough to allow her mind to wander productively. "Upstream," he said. "The source point is in the wrong location. Carol's been managing the symptom instead of the cause." She said it with the calm certainty of someone who has waited all day to say a true thing. "Sound familiar?" He pulled out of the school line and into the street. Sound familiar. She'd said it without knowing the full weight of what she was saying, without knowing that the entire week that had changed his professional life had been, essentially, the story of a building managing symptoms until someone came in and found the cause. She'd said it because it was the right analogy, because her brain worked in systems and she'd spotted the pattern, because she was 8 years old and she understood, in her bones, that you fix the source, not the consequence. "Yeah," he said, "it does." "Can we go tell Carol?" "Let's go tell Carol." He drove them through the November afternoon, his daughter with her notebook, her diagram, her absolute confidence in the correctness of her analysis. And he thought, not for the first time, not for the last, that the best thing he'd ever built wasn't a system or a repair or a process for catching faults before they became crises. It was this. The person in the seat next to him who had learned from watching him that you listened first, you looked carefully, you stayed until it was done, and you traced the problem to its source before you touched anything. There was a message in that, somewhere. Not a tidy one. Life didn't produce tidy messages, in his experience, but something true. The things you know don't care what car you drive. They don't care what the lobby thinks of you, or whether your clothes are pressed, or what floor you're authorized to access. They exist in you, built from years of paying attention, from all the floors you've crouched on, and all the machines you've listened to, and all the times you stayed when you could have left. Nobody can mock that out of you. Nobody can park it in the wrong lot. It goes where you go. And sometimes, not always, Not as often as it should, but sometimes the right person sees it. And when they do, the value of it becomes visible to everyone else in the room. Not because you changed, because they finally looked. He pulled up in front of Carol's house. Before he'd cut the engine, Lily was already out of the car and heading for the door, notebook in hand, calling Carol's name. He sat for a moment. His car knocked once, settling. He got out and followed his daughter up the walk, and behind him the November city went on doing what cities did, moving and building and breaking and fixing itself over and over with whatever was available, with whatever people were willing to stay and do the work. He rang Carol's bell. Lily was already inside.